Hi, I'm Ron Flagg, President of the Legal Services Corporation. Thank you for taking the time to lobby on behalf of LSC. You will be speaking to Congress at perhaps the most challenging moment in the history of legal aid in America. I realize that is quite a dramatic statement, but for reasons I will now describe, I truly believe it to be the case. Let me say at the outset, LSC and the 132 legal aid programs we fund throughout America are responding to the COVID-19 health crisis with great courage, dedication, and ingenuity. We, however, desperately need additional funding to meet the current and upcoming challenges, and that is where you can help LSC with the support of the American Bar Association and many others in seeking an additional $50 million in emergency funding. Your support in explaining the enormous spike in legal needs caused by COVID-19, particularly in your states and communities, and the critical role LSC and legal aid programs play in meeting those needs is indispensable. Before diving into COVID-19 and its effects, I want to remind you of where we were just a few months ago, before COVID-19. They weren't exactly rosy days, but rosier than the picture today. Before the pandemic, more than 57.3 million Americans, or 17.8% of the US population, qualified for legal assistance from LSC-funded programs. But the resources aren't available to meet all of those needs. LSC's Justice Gap report shows that 86%, I want to repeat that number, 86% of the civil legal problems of low-income Americans receive inadequate or no assistance. And again, this was before COVID-19. The Justice Gap, the difference between the civil legal needs of low-income Americans and the resources available to meet those needs, was already gaping prior to COVID-19. Although the appropriations process for fiscal year 2021 has been put on hold for now, at some point, members of Congress will return to create a budget for the next fiscal year. When they do, it will matter that they have heard from you, their constituents across the country. LSC asked for $652.6 million for fiscal year 2021. That amount would allow our grantees to help 60% more eligible clients in fiscal year 2021 than they did in the past. The $50 million in funding we are requesting in the next COVID-19 relief package is emergency supplemental support. It is in addition to our request for LSC's annual appropriation. We, and more importantly, the clients that our grantees serve, need both. The current pandemic will greatly increase the justice gap. Millions more people in the United States will qualify for legal aid. And again, before COVID-19, almost 58 million Americans qualified for legal aid. That number is going to increase markedly. We're only beginning to see how the coronavirus will affect our work. We've already seen in the last 4 weeks, 20 million new unemployment filings, an all-time record by a wide margin. This is going to lead to a spike in evictions once the current moratorium on evictions end. Indeed, even while the moratoriums are in effect, our grantees report that they are confronted by attempts to end run the moratoriums or just to blatantly violate those moratoriums. The combination of economic pressure and the necessity of stay-in-place orders has already led to a large increase in domestic violence cases all around the country. We're getting reports every day from throughout the country of marked increases in domestic violence. These cases can't wait for courts to resume normal operations. The need for protective orders from abusers typically require immediate action. Other legal needs that are climbing include, of course, given the nature of the challenges, unemployment claims and access to health care. Also, consumer scams, particularly those aimed at the elderly. These scams are particularly pernicious in the face of a health crisis in which the elderly face the greatest risks. While seeing a dramatic spike in needs for their services, legal aid programs are faced with a precipitous decline in resources due to reductions in state and local funds. In 2018, these funds exceeded $370 million. The National Association of IOLTA programs, and those are the folks who administer state and local funds, they project that state and local funding may plummet by 75% in the coming year. The losses from those declines far exceed the $50 million in emergency funding Congress previously appropriated to LSC in the CARES Act, along with the $50 million we're now seeking. One piece of this decline in funding are the funds from interest on lawyers' trust accounts. The IOLTA accounts and grants will fall substantially due to the reduction in interest rates to zero. For example, the Texas Access to Justice Foundation expects a 75% decline in revenue, or about $1 million per month of IOLTA-related grants. That's a lot of money to a legal aid program. The Northwest Justice Project in Washington State expects a $6 million decline in annual IOLTA funding. Legal aid providers are also dealing with a spike in needs for their services at a time when they themselves face acute operating barriers. Nearly all of LSC's grantees have had to close some or all of their offices and work and provide services remotely. In early March, over 80% of LSC's grantees reported that they would need additional computers, telecommunications equipment, and information technology to enable them to work and provide assistance remotely. 126 of our 132 grantees applied for emergency funding for technology to build their telework capacity. LSC granted awards to all 126 applicants, totaling $2.4 million to meet those needs. Another substantial operating challenge for many grantees is inconsistent judicial operations from court to court. Where state Supreme Courts lack authority to issue orders binding on all lower courts, it leaves local jurisdictions with the latitude to decide their own procedures. Consequently, legal aid attorneys and staff spend significant amounts of time contacting courts to try to understand the varying rules. Additionally, telephonic and video conferences vary depending on local court capacities. Now let me turn to what LSC is doing to help address these immense challenges. First, we have sought and are seeking, with your help, emergency funds from Congress. LSC, with the help of the ABA, succeeded in getting a $50 million supplemental appropriation as part of the CARES Act enacted on March 27th. Because of the enormous spike in legal needs, which I've described, and the rapidly declining state and local resources for legal aid, LSC is now seeking an additional $50 million. Significantly, our request is supported by the Conference of Chief Justices and the Conference of State Court Administrators, the two highest bodies of the state courts and state administrations. We also have a bipartisan letter of support from 6 members of the House for our additional request for $50 million. This includes 3 Republicans, Susan Brooks from Indiana, Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania, and Fred Upton from Michigan. The 3 Democrats signing the letter include Steve Cohn from Tennessee, Debbie Dingell from Michigan, and Joe Kennedy from Massachusetts. We are also supported in those efforts by, among others, of course, you and ABA President Judy Perry Martinez and business and law firm leaders. Second, LSC is promptly granting out the emergency funding appropriated to us. The CARES Act, as I mentioned, was enacted on March 27th. Within 3 weeks, just 3 weeks, LSC granted out $49.5 million in 2 separate grant programs. As I mentioned, we granted out $2.4 million for telework capacity building. Along with those funds, we are providing technical assistance to many of our grantees to help them use those funds effectively. Again, most of them had not operated remotely or certainly remotely on the scales they're operating today, and they need technical assistance, and we're providing that assistance. We have just granted out over $47 million in additional COVID-19 emergency funding to our grantees. We sought to allocate those funds to the areas of the country most severely affected by COVID-19. To do this, we used a formula that took into account both the poverty population of each of our grantees' service areas and also the number of unemployment insurance filings made in different areas during the last 2 weeks of March and the first 2 weeks of April. Third, in addition to seeking and granting out additional funding, LSC is serving as a national voice for the legal aid programs we fund and civil legal aid in general. We are gathering information daily from our grantees about what they are seeing on the ground among their clients and the innovative practices they have identified and are applying to meet rapidly increasing legal needs. We are disseminating that information to the public, Congress, and potential pro bono partners. For example, in a number of settings, we have held briefings at which executive directors and other lawyers from our grantees have spoken. The stories they tell are remarkable and moving. Stories of the enormous challenges faced by their clients, from ill health and or unemployment. Stories of the challenges faced by their clients just attempting to find and communicate with legal aid programs whose offices are now shuttered. Stories of the tremendous challenges the legal aid programs and their staff face in working remotely while family and friends are ill and even dying. Stories of the courage and ingenuity which legal aid programs across America are bringing to address these challenges. In early May, we will hold a briefing on the marked increase in domestic violence cases caused by COVID-19. Stay tuned to a date and a time for that, and I hope you'll listen in. In the meantime, I invite you to look at 2 very helpful resources on LSC's website, that is lsc.gov. First, please look at our COVID-19 webpage, which includes news stories about the growing legal needs caused by the pandemic and the steps legal aid programs are taking to meet those needs. The stories I've just described a moment ago. These stories can be filtered by state and by issue, so they should serve as a useful resource when you speak to members of Congress and their staff. You can figure out where the people you're talking to are from and try to find stories and issues that will be of interest to the people to whom you're talking. Second, the LSC website also includes the remarkably timely report of our disaster task force released just 10 months ago. The focus of the task force was to foster and promote better cooperation, coordination, and communication between and among the emergency management community, legal service providers, the private bar, the judiciary, community-based organizations, and the business community to ensure that low-income disaster survivors receive the legal assistance they need. The Disaster Task Force's recommendations highlight concrete steps that legal aid providers can take to build a systematic, coordinated, and sustainable approach to helping low-income individuals, families, and communities prepare for, respond to, and recover from a disaster. COVID-19 obviously qualifies. The task force's recommendations focus on relationship building, training attorneys and volunteers to recognize disaster-related civil legal issues and to represent low-income disaster survivors, as well as enabling legal services providers, courts, individuals, families, and communities to better prepare for disasters. I want to end where I began. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to lobby on behalf of the Legal Services Corporation. Thank you for helping to advance access to justice in America at perhaps the most challenging moment in the history of civil legal aid. Remember that for every phone call, email, or tweet, you bring with you the most important thing that matters to every member of Congress. You are his or her constituent. Constituent voices matter. You can bring home how this worldwide pandemic is affecting the communities, the neighbors, and constituents your member serves. Good luck, stay well, and thank you.